Last month, Canva put the cat amongst the editing pigeons when they announced that Affinity would forevermore be free, completely gratis, no cost involved. You get yourself a bitmap editor akin to Photoshop for absolutely free. I've always been slightly anti establishment, so the option to basically break away from Adobe is a very, very attractive offering. And I have a lot of photographers who join me on workshops around the world who are also looking for a way to basically break free from that monthly tithe that they pay out to Adobe to be able to use Lightroom and Photoshop. Photoshop in particular. This is particularly pertinent now that Adobe have announced and started to implement their price increases over the last few months, such that your monthly subscription fee, or tithe as I like to call it, is basically double to what it was a year ago. So the Affinity option is now rather interesting. However, can this program actually replace Photoshop, and can it do so for free? Because of course, Canva have been quite clever in this, and some of the more AI-oriented processes inside the program require you to have Canva, which is a monthly subscription fee. But if you're prepared to forgo some of these options like super resolution, can you actually continue to use Affinity in lieu of Photoshop without having to pay the price? So I'm going to try and look at that, and I'm going to start with this today by going through my usual workflow, which is with Capture One, and I have an image here that I shot in the Drakensberg, which I intend to essentially blend together to be able to get a nice foreground exposure and a decent sky exposure in the background. Now I've got these two photographs in Capture One, and usually I would actually go and edit these images and then open them up in Photoshop. But just to show some of the capabilities of Affinity, I'm going to open these directly as raw files into Affinity pixel mode. So I have the two images. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say open with, and you will see that it says Affinity Store. Now that Affinity have put everything together into one application, you've got Designer, Pixel, and Illustrator essentially in one app. So now I will just go open with Affinity Store. So the images will open up into Affinity as if it were Adobe Camera Raw. You can see by this in the top left-hand corner, I've got a develop block over here. And basically you can see your two images separated in exactly as they would be in Photoshop as different images, but they haven't been developed yet into bitmap images yet. They're still raw files. On the right-hand side, you can see your toolbar for developing the photographs. So this is the image that I would be using as my foreground in this photograph. So I still want to brighten this exposure up, and you can see you have your usual settings that you would ordinarily find in Adobe Camera Raw. They might be laid out slightly differently, that's all. So I want to just get my brightness up a little bit. My black point, I would like to just open that up a touch over here, and we can add a little smidgen of clarity and some vibrance to the photograph, and then the white balance I suspect needs to be adjusted. So you have to actually tick these on. So I'm going to tick that on, and then I'm going to just bring my white balance down a little bit and tweak it ever so slightly. Now remember, I am only working on my foreground file over here. So I'm just going to continue with my shadows and highlights, open up the shadows a touch, and open up the highlights as well. And again, I'm only looking really at the foreground of this photograph. And then profiles is fairly important, which isn't set automatically. It's busy putting it into sRGB. I want to edit this as Adobe RGB 98 because I'm using this as a full archival photograph that I will be working on. Okay, so there are my settings that I've added to this particular photograph. If I'd like to, I can now save these particular settings as a preset. So I can go up to the preset bar and I can say add preset, and I'm just going to call this Berg Render. Then I'm going to go to my next photograph and I'm actually going to do the same thing. I'm going to say Berg Render just to open up the same settings. The photographs are more or less the same. And I need to just tweak my sky now. So I'm going to just get my color out in the sky. We want a bit more clarity in that and some contrast perhaps. Let's open up some more shadows there. There we go. So again, we're only concentrating on the sky now in this instance. We make sure our profiles are set to Adobe RGB, and we now have our two photographs, which we are going to basically pull together. So I'm now going to open these by saying develop into the photograph, and the second one as well, develop. Now, unfortunately, Affinity doesn't have a automated stacking of images and then auto aligning of them yet, which means that is something that you would have to do by first creating TIFF files and then creating a new stacked image, which I will look at in a separate video going ahead. For the time being, though, we're going to take these two photographs and we're going to layer them the old-fashioned way, which is basically to take our one image, select all by hitting Command A, Command C to be able to copy it, and then go to the next photograph and Command V to plug it in, so that we now have two layers inside our layered stack. We can close this photograph because I no longer need it, so don't save. And we're now working on our individual photograph over here. And we're wanting the sky from the one image to be blended into the foreground of the other. Looking at the layer palette over here, it looks almost similar to the Photoshop layer palette that you might be familiar with. You can see that you've got your eyes to be able to visualize each of those layers, and you can obviously change your opacity of a layer simply by using the opacity, and of course, you can change its blend modes. And all of it is more or less the same as you would have seen inside Photoshop in this particular light. So now what we're wanting to do is do a very, very basic blend. So I'm going to grab my lasso tool, it's shortcut key L, or you can use the toolbar on the left-hand side, and I'm going to make a very rough selection around my sky over here. And there we go. So you can see we have marching ants. Now I would like to basically create a mask from that. So we're going to head down to our mask tool, which is again very similar to Photoshop, and click on that. And you can see that we now have our mask in place. Interestingly, the marching ants continue. So you actually have to hit Command D to be able to remove those. So there we go. We now have this. Now, unfortunately, there is no properties panel like you would see in Photoshop. To be able to blend this now, in other words, to use that feathering effect that we would have used inside the properties panel, we actually have to head up to Pixel, Filters, Blur, and then Gaussian. And you will see that this is now applied to the mask itself. So I can take my radius and I can pull it out to the right-hand side. Astute viewers will already notice that I can only go to 100 pixels, which isn't nearly enough if you're trying to do a soft blend between your two different layers. However, you don't have to stick with that. You can actually type in whatever layer or whatever pixel amount you want. So I'm going to type in 300. And you can see immediately I end up with a much softer edge to my mask over here. And then if I click this down, you can see there's my mask. And to see the mask itself, you can hit Alt and or Option if you're on a PC and double click on your layer. And there you go. There is my mask over here. And you can switch them off and on and view between. All right, so we're wanting that on. If I want to now adjust my foreground a little bit more, I can head down to my adjustment layer over here and we can bring up a new adjustment. So for instance, I will go through to my curves control. If I can just find curves quickly. There we go. Go through to curves and then I can adjust just that. But at the moment you can see it's affecting the entire image. If I'd like to apply that just to an individual layer, I have to actually grab the curves adjustment and bring it down to the correct layer. So it is now just above my base layer. And now if I adjust it, you can see that it is only affecting my bottom images over here, or the bottom image in the layer stack. To be able to see my bottom image, just hold down the Option button and click on your image in the layer stack and you will see it comes through. Clicking again will bring you back your full image. Now, what's particularly useful about this though is that if I would like to, I can actually double click on the image again and I can head back into my develop section. So I'm going to double click here and you can see once more I'm back into the ACR version of Affinity, which is their raw development mode. So again, I can now come back in and adjust that image. But what is important over here is that my masks are still in place. So that's actually quite cool. So I can still come in and work on an image and you'll notice that it's only affecting the layer that I'm actually attached to. So if I say develop now, it'll jump me back into Affinity with the bitmap section itself. So that is a very simple way to very quickly be able to make my adjustments. Now let's say I want to just lighten up just those flowers in the foreground, but there are obviously other ways to be able to create selections inside Affinity, and they have a fairly powerful color and tonal range selection tool. So what I'm now going to do is head up into my pixel pixel selection, and I'm going to say select sampled color. So now I'll take my cursor and I will click on just those little flowers, and you can see if I zoom in, there we go. Just my flowers are now selected. You can change the tolerance with a little slider over here to select less or more of these, and then we can say apply. Now, when we look at our selection, it is just in place. And if I want to now add a adjustment layer to that, I can click on my adjustment layer and we will choose curves. Notice still that the marching ants are in place, so I should probably undo them. And now if I want to brighten up my flowers, I can just brighten them up a little bit. See them before and after. We just go to our little eye. There you go. And we'll zoom out. Zoom out is Command 0, so most of the shortcut keys work very much the same way as they would have in Photoshop. And again, if I wanted to see my actual mask, just hit Option or Alt and click on the mask itself and you can see the mask. Now, if I wanted to blur that out a little bit, we'd have to go through the same process again. We'd head up back into Pixel, Filters, Blur, Gaussian, and then that is going to affect this layer here. So I can just blur that out a touch, apply, and now my mask is ever so slightly blurred. Heading back to my file now, what we're going to do is just take a quick glance around here, and that's looking a little bit better. If I feel that adding that curves adjustment has affected too much in the background, so you can see that my mountain has been affected a little bit, I can always go inside my mask. So we're going to make sure that we're on the mask itself. I'm going to hold down, get into my brush tool, which is shortcut key B, and then you will notice that in the left hand side you have your color swatch, and it works in exactly the same way as Photoshop, and even your shortcut keys would work. So X will switch between black or white, and we're now going to paint some black ink onto our mask over here. So we're just going to remove the issue that I had with the background. You can actually see me painting there on those colors. There we go. Okay, so there we go. There is our very basic edit of the photograph using different layers inside Affinity. I won't lie, it has taken me a while just to be able to figure this out because Affinity does have some quirks to it that Photoshop doesn't necessarily have. This is step one in me trying to figure out whether Affinity is a worthwhile alternative to Photoshop. So I'm going to be going through in a series of videos going forward how I would potentially use Affinity in lieu of Photoshop. If you have any suggestions and you'd like to hear more about this and you think that this might work for you as well, please pop it down in the comments below. And of course, remember to hit the subscribe button if you would like to get updates as to when I'm going to be putting out more videos like this. Now, if I hit save or save as, the problem is that this is going to save as an Affinity file, which is not necessarily readable by other programs. So if I look inside Capture One after hitting save, it's not going to be there. You're not going to find it, but you will notice that you have the same file as a .af file, which is an Affinity document. If you would like to save it as a layered TIFF file, what you actually need to do is to export the file. And this is kind of cool because there are a whole different number of ways that you can export the file itself. So if we head on to the shortcut key, which is Shift Option Command W, or you can just head up to File, Export, you'll now see that you get a dialog that allows you to export a number of different types of files, and including, and this is amazing actually, PSD files. So I can even click through to PSD and I can preserve layers and so on, but as a Photoshop document. I'm going to use TIFF though, because I always find that TIFF, it being more open source, allows me to use it in multiple different programs. So I'm going to hit TIFF RGB 16-bit, and I now have a bunch of options over here in how I'm going to export the file. So I would like to include my Affinity layers. So it does mean that it's going to be a very large photograph because we have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different layers over here. I could always make it smaller by not exporting the hidden layers, or I can just save it as a flattened image, which doesn't save the layers themselves. And you can see each time you do this, it changes your file size, so you can work out how big your file is going to be. So if I'm going to say, save my Affinity layers, it is going to be quite a large file. But this obviously means that I can open it up again in Affinity and be able to work on the file once more inside Affinity with its own specific tools. So now when I hit export, and you will see it's going to, I can bring it back to the folder that it came from, and I'm going to say save. Now we see that it pops up in Capture One over here as a layered TIFF file. So if I wanted to, I could continue working on the file in Capture One. Right, so that is basically Affinity Pixel mode, because of course Affinity now does have various different modes available to it, all inside one app. And it is all free unless you need some of the tools that are unique to Canva. So is it worthwhile? I'm still on the fence about this, but I will be exploring this in future videos. Until the next one though, thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers.